I'm Donald Taylor, and I'm coming to you in a recording from Europe. I'm in the Netherlands at the moment. Normally, I'm based in London. What I want to do today is spend 10 to 15 minutes talking about how workplace learning and development must change in order to meet the needs of a very different future, one that is AI powered. Let me share some slides to make this clearer. 15 minutes is not enough in order to share everything I want to say. So what I want to do is get my message over very quickly and clearly at the beginning in just 3 words. In order for learning and development to get ready for an AI future, we must change. Not a complicated sentence. I hope, though, if you remember nothing else from this presentation, you remember this. Here's why. Learning and development in the past has centered itself on producing content, courses, learning content, job aids, a wide range of things. That's where our skill has been spent. That's where most of our time is used because we are experts at doing it. The problem is that with generative AI, it is now possible to create content far more easily than ever before. Here's a bit of video that was produced by Josh Cavalier in the States. It's actually a year old, but it's still very impressive. Josh wondered, what would it be like if I needed to create a video for a company that deals with shellfish and needed some compliance training? He set up this very quickly with AI.
Is your cooler really under the limit? Let's find out.
It's not perfect.
In 5 minutes you'll master the system that turns audits into victory laps.
Step 1 for Toad. Receive and inspect live shellfish.
This is just the first 20 seconds of this video, which runs for about 5 minutes. And the extraordinary thing is that the whole thing is produced with AI. The voices, the scripts and everything, and it's not improved. So this is the very raw footage. Josh reckoned back in June of 2025 that this could be improved very quickly. The amount of money it cost with AI was probably a couple of $100. Add another couple of hours work into it, and you could make a video that was perfectly acceptable for training. Now, if you've created video, you know how expensive it is. You know how time consuming it is. You know that it would probably take $15,000 to create a video of this sort of size, this sort of length, this detail, and you'd have to take over the facility for at least half a day to do it. And you can do it all now in a matter of minutes on your laptop using a generative AI tool. This is just one example of many, many things you can do with AI in learning and development. And I'm not saying we should focus on video. What I'm saying is AI enables people in the organization, whether they're in learning and development or anywhere in the organization, to create content. And there's lots of evidence that people already are. Let's look at how the use of AI is changing within the learning and development department. And then I'm going to come to our conclusion about what we need to do for the future. With my colleague Egla Vinauskaita, I've produced 5 reports since the launch of ChatGPT. The first was on the anniversary of the launch of ChatGPT, and then we had one a year followed with interim reports as well. And you can see them there, and we've become more exciting in our layout of the covers of the magazine with the most recent one, the Transformation Triangle, which came out in May of this year. But I want to look at the results of this report, which was the L&D, AI and L&D report for 2025, which came out in October of last year. It was our 3rd annual report. We had over 600 respondents from over 50 countries, and we had 20 pages of case studies in there. So I recommend reading it if you want to see what people are really doing with AI in L&D. But I'm not going to focus on the case studies. We don't have time. I'm going to look at just some basic numbers from the research. And it shows us, firstly, that things have shifted. People were unsure about AI 3 or 4 years ago. Now it's part of what we do. So each year we ask people, how much are you using AI in L&D? And essentially there are 3 buckets they can go into, 3 categories. Not using it, or the pre-use, experimenting with it, or using it in depth. For 2023 and 2024, things changed a bit, but the people who are using AI in L&D a lot were around the 40% mark, and then in 2025 it leapt up to over 50%. And if you include the people in the green bar who are piloting, because we don't include piloting in the blue section, if we include the pilots, it's over 70% of people. That's a huge leap in the use of AI in L&D. In other words, it's no longer something that is strange and unusual. It is now part of the toolkit. Okay, interesting. But what are people doing with AI in L&D? Well, we ask them about this in 2 different ways. And one thing we do is we give them a free text box to complete, and they let us know in quite a lot of detail what they're doing. So those 600 people from 50 countries, they answer the question, how are you using AI in L&D? They produce about 20,000 words, which is a fairly long, short story, or about a third of a book. And when we do that and we look at what their answers are, we can find that there are 4 categories that people have that we can put them into. They are dealing with content and design, the big blue box, operations, strategy, and workforce enablement. So that's all of those words put into 4 boxes. And we do that by going through and reading them all and sorting them out. But we also give people a checklist. Which of these things are you using AI for? And if we look at these list of 12 things and we look at the categories we just looked at, remember that content is that blue box. It's not surprising, perhaps, that content dominates the top half of the table. And at the bottom, we've got that big blue section, that lavender section for workforce enablement. Well, this looks very much like the same question and the same results of the same graph for 2024, dominated by content, everything else at the bottom. But there are 2 things I want to point out. Firstly, that if we look at one thing on this graph that is different, it is this thing here, that qualitative data analysis has jumped up from the 8th position last year to the 5th position in 2025. So already we're seeing there's a shift in what people are doing. That's the major shift. But the other thing lies behind these words. These are just numbers. But when we look at the words that people give us in that free text box, when we ask them, what are you doing with AI in L&D? People use words differently now to how they used them 2 and 3 years ago. And in particular, because we count all the words and we count incidents of particularly important words, if we look at some of the words in 2025 versus those in 2023, there's a big jump. And the 3 words that occur in the top 10 this year that were nowhere near the top 10 in 2023 are analysis, data, and research. And research was number 10 in the words used this year. It wasn't even in the top 50 in 2023. Now, what this tells us is that there's an increasing sophistication in the use. So yes, we're using AI to produce content just like we did before, but it's very different. In the past, we put a question into ChatGPT and copied the answer into a slide. Now it's being used in different ways. So let's look at those 4 categories of use and just have a bit of a close look at what people said about them. Now, what I'm doing is I'm taking one slide here to summarize something like 15 pages of our report, which look in detail at how AI is being used. I think the key thing is that it's being used for content and design, as I say, in a more sophisticated way. So we're incorporating AI in the user experience, but I think what's really interesting for me is that the traditional way of producing content, which is tell me what you need, I go off and do it, and I come back a week later or maybe 3 weeks later with something, is changing. It's a much more iterative design process. Iterative in the sense that people are going backwards and forwards with the people who are going to use the content, and backwards and forwards with AI. And they're using it to be challenged and to challenge ourselves. So we're saying things like, here's a course, what do you think of this? Is this good or bad? How could it be improved? Where are the assumptions wrong? How does this fit with other things we've done? Using generative AI in a way that it wasn't being used very much 2 years ago. The operation stuff is fairly straightforward. We're using it typically for better administration of email and so on, and better communications. But the strategy and the workforce enablement stuff is interesting. The strategy stuff is enabling us to do that analysis stuff at scale, looking at reports for the organization, understanding how the organization works, looking at qualitative data, as we saw earlier, the data about, for example, survey results, and understanding what it is that people mean when they say something, and drilling down into a look at, I don't know, 20,000 survey results across an organization to discover where people's real needs are. The sort of stuff that was almost impossible to do by hand or very time consuming is now far easier to do. And workforce enablement, similarly, we're using AI to work with individuals to help them, particularly with performance support in what they're doing. So there are new types of learning support, new types of performance support that we're using AI for that weren't there certainly 4 years ago, and even 3 or 2 years ago with the use of AI and L&D, it wasn't there. We're being much more imaginative about simulations, coaching in particular. Those are two areas that are very much on the rise this year. So we've got in the report the data side of things, which you should look at if you choose to download it. And we've got, as I say, 20 pages of case studies, which are really worth reading. On there's a URL, but actually I'm going to give you my LinkedIn at the end. And probably that's the best way to get hold of me in order to find out more about these and other reports that we produced. So this is the tactical side. This is how people are using AI and L&D at the moment. But I want to spend the final 5 minutes looking at what the future looks like for AI in L&D. And I think it's very different. So Egler and I have come up with this idea of the 3 possible futures for AI in L&D, or rather the 3 possible futures for L&D in an AI world. And we're doing this not because we're sitting down and thinking about things in an abstract way. Rather, we are doing this because we are looking at the actual things that people are actually doing and the people we interview, and pulling out of that the sense of what people are doing and trying to make sense of it. In other words, we are describing the actual world rather than trying to tell people what to do. Key to this is what I said right at the beginning. The focus on content that L&D has had in the past is not sustainable as a way of L&D being different. What it means is that if we are going to be different in the future, we have to do something that you can't do with generative AI. I think that's really rather important, because if somebody else can do it, what are we being employed for? There are 3 possible things that we can do with AI in L&D. And there are 3 possible futures that AI makes possible for us, just as at the same time, AI removes that foundation, that strength that we had in the past, that we were the people who knew how to create content. Anybody can create content now. It may not be good, but it's cheap and it's fast. Against that, we have to do something different and more impactful for the business. So here are the 3 different destinations that we think L&D can end up with: skills authority, enablement partner, and adaptation engine. I'm going to look very quickly at these 3. Then I'm going to recommend you get in touch with me and I'll send you the report so that you can learn more about the transformation triangle. So we want to get away from this content-focused approach and move towards being, let's say, a skills authority. The key thing that needs to be true here is that skills are a critical business asset and understood as that in learning and development and also across the business. So managers, executives, employees Everybody takes skills seriously, and that is embedded in the culture. And that's built on an organizational understanding that the organization can only do its job when everybody is performing well by having built skills and having developed those over time. The organizations which do this well have something which is a common theme across all 3 points in our triangle, which is that learning is consequential. Learning is consequential. It matters to the individual. It matters to the organization. It matters to the organization because the organization understands that people with skills do the job properly. Without skills, they can't. It matters to the individual because if the individual knows that if they don't develop their skills, they won't have a job in the future. Their career is threatened. This is an absolute reality that we see in the organizations that take the skills authority seriously. It's also true for other parts of the triangle. So the enablement partner, for example, here in these companies which have succeeded doing this, also learning is consequential. Here, rather than being a centralized area like with the skills authority, with the enablement partner, learning and development can also be centralized, but the creation and the distribution of useful information and contacts and content is done elsewhere. So let's say you're working in a hotel chain and your L&D department is an enablement partner. Well, if somebody in Sydney discovers a way to improve check-in times at the front desk by 3 or 4 minutes, that's something the rest of the business should know about. The central learning and development function as an enablement partner produces the systems, produces the network, and encourages and lets people create content which is good to share their ideas and spread it across the organization. So they do that. They know that there is expertise worth surfacing in the organization, and L&D supports that, but without controlling it. For this to work, the expertise in the organization needs to be there, and there needs to be a culture of accepting that sharing it is a great idea. Now, that culture doesn't come from L&D, it comes from the top, but L&D can help build that culture. Again, here, learning is consequential. And in the final one of our 3 points of the triangle, the adaptation engine, L&D doesn't really exist anymore. There's a multidisciplinary team, a group that goes out and sorts out problems. Here, it's crucial that that team, which will look at training, yes, but also talent, also operational systems and other things as well, to understand where is performance failing and why, as part of a systemic approach to performance. To do that, the organization has to be happy with the idea of being shown the truth. So organizations which we've seen have been successful at doing this are those which are completely focused on performance and have very little ego and very little silos inside. Everyone's focused on just getting the job done. But again, here, if learning is the solution, it's consequential. Everybody in the organization knows we've got to improve that in order to do what we need to do to make the business work. And so these 3 points, sorry, I should say that that is the epitome, this adaptation engine part, of performance being a systems problem rather than an individual problem. It's not because 1 or 2 people don't know how to do their jobs, they're not skilled. It's because the whole system of working isn't set up adequately for people. So these 3 points, the skills authority, enablement partner, and adaptation engine, are what we see as being the places that L&D can move to, and we're seeing L&D move to. There is a lot in that I haven't shared with you, the things that make the journey faster, the drags that hold us back on the journey. If you go and look at the report, and the URL is there, then yeah, you'll be able to get a whole bunch of details. The report's about 45 pages, it's pretty substantial. And that's me. Please scan the QR code in order to follow me on LinkedIn, and I'd love to stay in touch. I always say it's the end of a presentation, but hopefully the beginning of a conversation. I look forward to being in touch in the future and supporting you in your journey into AI and L&D and the future.